Welcome to Boomhauer69's channel, and today Boomhauer is going to talk about why I like the early days of automobiles. I talk a lot how I'm fascinated with cars from the 1800s and 1900s, and I want to talk about why I like them so much. It's the main reason why is just sitting there thinking about all the challenges that the inventors back in those times, like Carl Benz, Henry Ford, Ransom Elliott Owens, and the Dodge brothers, and Chrysler, and Packard, and Hudson, and all those guys and men and women that helped build the automobiles back in the days, all the challenges they had to face and stuff. Like, back in those times, people didn't have welders and computers, and sometimes they didn't even have certain wrenches and certain size wrenches and stuff, and they had to build their own tools, just to build a car, and because back in those days, a lot of times you only had two options for an automobile. You either, one, made it yourself with whatever you had around your homestead, or two, if you're lucky, you had the money and you could go out and buy an automobile and stuff. And I just love how so simple and basic, but yet elegant and nice those cars were. And I like how a lot of those manufacturers took their time and really thought things through and made a car that was built to last, not like what they do nowadays. Nowadays to me, they make high-end garbage cars, and back then they took their time to make a car that was functioned and was really good, and it was like what Henry Ford, he built cars that a common man and person could own and afford, and he really saw a market for market to sell cars, and because of him, he helped bring down the price of cars, and he really made a car that was built to last, because even to this day, there's a ton of Model Ts and Model As and Model Ns and still around today, because they made cars that were built to last. Like, them cars back then, 10 years down the line, that car would still probably be running and going. Well, cars nowadays, after 2 years, they rust out, and you basically got to go buy a new one, And back in those days, you had an automobile, you could pass it down to your family members, pass it down to your grandkids or whatever, and stuff. And that's what really gets me, is how they took something that was so primitive, basic, but yet they made it really nice and elegant and beautiful, and how they took their time, and even just thinking about the way they did things, and bend the metals and fuse metal together, and how they did things. Like, they didn't have, like, where you could go in the store and say, yeah, give me this size tire and that tire. If they wanted to make rubber tires, they had to build their own, somehow manufacture and melt down the rubber and build their own tire and stuff. And those cars that they broke down, you just go in the glove box, pull out, you could go into if you had it on you, you could pull out in a little box somewhere. It would come with the tools you needed to work on your car, and the owner's manual and stuff, and it would tell you, this is how you work on your automobiles, because back then they had no mechanics or anything, so they made sure to easily tell the owner of the vehicle how you do certain things. How do you change spark plugs? How do you set timing? How to set the spark and advance your spark, and how to adjust your throttle, and how to shift the gears, and all that stuff, and how they, again, it's how they was able to take something so basic and make it really nice and beautiful, and how they really took their time and thought things out and stuff on a lot of those. And back then, of course, they didn't have like all these set standards and regulations and all this stuff. They were freely to build whatever their heart desired, and they didn't have all these set standards to go by, so they had to just build it and see what works, try it out for a couple of years on the market if they were a person selling an automobile to the general public, and they would see what works and go from there and stuff. And that's what really gets me fascinated, is just sitting there thinking about, okay, how did they manage to do that? Because, like, for example, fusing metals together, I could sit there and think, oh, they must have had to somehow come up with some sort of, like, homemade welder or whatever, or put that piece of sheet metal in hot coals and a charcoal stove and heat up the metal to fuse it together and stuff. And just thinking about that and the tools and stuff, because a lot of people don't realize this, and even probably some mechanics out there probably don't realize this, that back in those days, them old boys, if they wanted to build a car, a lot of times they had to build the tools before they could actually make the car themselves. They had to first build the tools to make the car and things, and that's just what really fascinates me. It's just thinking about all the challenges and stuff they had to face, and how they were still able to make a lot of automakers back then were able to make something so easy for the common person to afford, and make it so easy to work on and stuff, and how so basic it was, And it goes to show the world that in driving, you don't need a whole lot of fancy bells and whistles and stuff, They didn't have TVs in cars and radios and all this junk. You was even lucky if you bought an automobile and it came with electric lights. A lot of them came with what they call acetylene carbine lights and kerosene lanterns. That's what they had for lighting back then. A lot of times you didn't, and if you did have, and a lot of times if you had electric lights, that was an option, and was a costly one at that, until batteries became cheaper and stuff, and even electric starts. Some cars didn't have electric starts, which just crank it by a handle or even pull a ripcord, but mostly it was just hand crank. You either in front of the car, down below had a little crank handle you'd crank, or on the side of the car there'd be a whole way of sliding the crank handle to crank it, get over and stuff. And that's what fascinates me. It's just how cars back then were so basic, but yet they were built really nice and really thought out a lot of times, and how simple and basic, and work on, like, the manuals. They really showed you how to, if you bought a car, it would come with this big old manual that would tell you how to basically take the car, put it in your barn, tear it down and build it back from the ground up, and they came with the tools you needed to fix it and get it back on the road. Like nowadays, cars, if you go out and buy a car, some cars will require a special tool to work on the car, but instead of selling that tool with the car, they will say, oh, you gotta go to this auto parts store and buy X amount of tool, yada yada, for X amount of dollars, and you don't even get it with the car. Back then, they gave you practically the tools and things you would need to make the car run. The only thing you had to do back in those days was once in a while maybe buy a tire for the car and the oil and gas, and that was it. If you bought an automobile and you needed the tools, it came with the tools you needed to work on the car, basically, and stuff. And just, thinking about what the inventors back in those days that invented the automobiles, like Louis Chevrolet, Ransom Elliott O's, Henry Ford, Carl Benz, and the Dodge brothers, and the Hudson Company, and Packard, and the Ramblers, and all those people, and Willys, and all of them, and Rolls-Royce, and all those car manufacturers, and what they had to go through is is what fascinates me, and it's really too also the simplicity and basicness of the automobiles, and how they, when they made cars, they just didn't stamp out a car and sell their market. A lot of them really took the time to make a beautiful, like, basically art masterpiece and stuff. Like, I like looking sometimes when I go to car museums and stuff and car shows. I like looking for the old cars from the 1800s and 1900s and the what they call the brass era of cars and stuff. I really like how a lot of cars had some really nice shiny brass and stuff, and just how they made cars built to last, and they were so simple, basic, and a lot of times they were easy to work on, where the common man could simply crawl underneath the car and under 20, 30 minutes be right back on the road, going back to wherever he was going and stuff. And nowadays cars, you gotta have all these fancy tools and computers and all this other garbage to work on the car, where what used to probably take maybe 20, 30 minutes at the most is now taking you practically half a day to get it going and stuff. And back then, those cars, they didn't have sensors, computers, TVs, radios, none of that stuff. If you had a battery in the car, all it basically did was either one, power the electric lights if you had it, or an electric starter if you had it. And even back then, the electronic lights and starter were simply an option sometimes. And even back then, if the electric starter in your car didn't work, you could just get out and hand crank it over and be on your merry way and stuff. And even back then, like changing a tire, a lot of those old cars had practically just a bicycle tire for a wheel, and if you broke down beside the road, you could just wrap a big old gob of tape around the tube and get you on by until you could get another tube and stuff. And because they had a lot of those cars just had tubes and tires, where if you blew a tire, you could easily with a few hand tools get the tire off, and you didn't need no fancy tools or anything. You just jack up the car, rip the tire off, and slap another tire on and be on your merry way and stuff. Basically, basic wrenches and some duct tape, you could have a flat tire fix and be on your merry way. Nowadays, these new cars, you gotta make sure sometimes you have a special socket or a special wrench just to even get the darn tire off, and sometimes you even need to just call a wrecker and have it took into a mechanic's garage to replace and repair the tire. And if you're lucky, your car may come with a spare tire nowadays. And nowadays, even cars don't even come with a spare tire. That's one thing I miss. I remember the cars my father, he would always make sure, now, does it come with a spare tire? And nowadays, they don't even come with a spare tire. And back then, it came with all the tools and basically knowledge you needed to make your car successful and make you a happy driver and stuff. And plus, and how those cars are, even some of them are even still on the road today. You can still today find Ford Model Ts still going down the road and stuff if you go to your local car shows and stuff. And a lot of them were really built to last, and how they would, you could buy back in those days, you could buy a brand new Model T and practically pass it down to your grandkids because it was still going strong and still running and everything. And that's, to me, that's what fascinates me and stuff too, and fascinates me. And biggest too is just thinking about all the hoops and stuff they had to go through, because there was really no set standards, and a lot of areas didn't even have cars for around them for hundreds of miles. Like, if you were somebody that knew about automobiles, some people, you'd go in an area with an automobile and you'd walk in a town and drive into town in an automobile, and a lot of people would stand around saying, what the world's that? Because a lot of towns in the late 1800s and early 1900s, never even heard or seen of an automobile. So if you broke down somewhere, you best make sure you knew how to work on it, or you'd be finding you a new home, buying you a new home in the area, basically, and stuff. And so that, a lot of those manufacturers, they thought about that stuff, making it easy for the common man and woman to work on themselves and stuff, and just thinking about how creative cars were back then, and the creativity behind it, and the tools they had to probably invent just to build whatever they was building. If they wanted to build a motor, all the tools they had to probably build and stuff to do it, and how they fused the metals together without no welders and all that stuff. It's just all around that's what fascinates me and stuff, and how so simple and basic say the car was, but yet how nice and well built they made the car and stuff, Because that's what I like about those early automobiles, is that sort of stuff behind it. Like, just thinking about the brass era of cars and stuff, and like they used to call it the brass era cars when they would use shiny brass metals and make a car look really nice and unique. And the one thing I like about those cars too is you could have a Model T and a Curb Dash O's or a Buick or whatever other car standing next side by side, and you could tell the difference from between the one car and the next, and stuff. And it just fascinates me. It fascinates me when I think about that stuff all the time. It's like, how did they do that? It's a lot to do with it. It's like, how did they do that? Because they didn't have this back then. They didn't have a welder. Welders didn't come until such and such a time, and all this stuff. And just sitting there thinking about how they went about building the car and how they did certain things and stuff. Like the upholstery, I look at pictures of cars all the time, and a lot of old cars wasn't even fully enclosed. They was basically a convertible car without the convertible top, and you're sitting there thinking, wow, how did they manage to make the fabric last so long in the weather conditions? Like here in Michigan, we get snow all the time, and just thinking about, man, how was they able to make that and make it withstand the weather and stuff? And that's what I think about. It's just basically all the challenges they had to go through in order to create and invent an automobile. That's what fascinates me a lot about the early days of automobiles. All the challenges they faced when it came to building a car and stuff, because they didn't have no set standards. They didn't have the modern day tools like we had, and then if they decided to manufacture the car, a lot of those automobiles makers would say, okay, what failed and how do we make this car again where that part won't fail again, and just also the fact that how long a car was able to last in those times. A lot of those cars go 10, 20, 30 years without breaking down, and nowadays cars, after 2 years, you gotta take it in the shop for major repair practically, or it's all rusted out and you gotta send it to the scrapyard or something. But yeah. But there you have it. I'm gonna try to cut this short because I'll ramble on. But yeah, there's why I like the early days of automobiling. It's just all the history behind how they went about making cars and how they made them built to last, how they made cars so simple and easy to use and stuff, and just even thinking about the manuals, back in those days, when they made an owner's manual for an automobile, it told you how to do everything, and it was all laid out in detail, where it basically would show you how to tear the car in your barn, tear it all apart and put it back together and stuff, and that's what fascinates me, and just really what must have been going through those inventors' minds when they were saying, I want to create an automobile like Henry Ford in his quadricycle. Just him sitting there thinking about how am I going to make this a reality? Because that's what I do all the time. I want to build a car myself, and I'm sitting there always thinking about how am I going to make this a reality and stuff, and it just fascinates me to no end of how they went about that sort of stuff, and just sitting there thinking about how did they do that, because they didn't have this and stuff, and that's what I think we need to do nowadays with automobiles is, why don't we go back to the basics of automobiling? Why don't we manufacture a car that actually is affordable for the common man to buy and be able to keep and maintain on the road, that's going to last 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, Why are we going back in time instead of forward, Henry Ford, he made a car that was for the common, where the common person could afford it, keep and maintain it on the road without breaking the bank. Nowadays, you go out and buy just a basic mid-size or compact car, it's going to cost you brand new $40,000, $50,000, and then on top of that, in 2 years' time, you got to take it into a mechanic garage, pay a mechanic, his time an hour, and then parts, labor, and all that stuff. It's crazy, Like, I think around here, I think a lot of mechanics garages are getting like $75 to $100 an hour, where the car repair is costing $5, $7, $8 and stuff. And to me, that's crazy. That's why I like the older automobiles, because they were easy to afford, all around easy to afford and stuff. But yeah, they were cheap, easy to afford, but they were so basic, but a lot of them were laid out real nice, and they were built to a certain quality standard, and I say if you're going to build something, then if you're an automaker out here and you're watching this video right now, if you're Ford Motor Company, Dodge, Diamond Chrysler, General Motors, Honda, Toyota, whoever, if you're one of the CEOs you're watching this video, ask yourself this question when you're talking with your team of people and thinking about building a car. Would you drive that automobile yourself? Because to me, that's what a lot of those inventors did, like Henry Ford. When he built the quadricycle, he built something that he would actually drive himself. And then he got the idea to, hey, I ought to market this idea to other people and stuff. So, to me, and that's what I would like to do. That's what I want to do, is build a vintage car, but build something that I would actually drive myself. That I would, without hesitant, hop in it and go down the road if I legally could, and drive it down the road and no problems. But of course, homemade cars nowadays, if you try to drive them on the roads, a cop's gonna pull you over, you'll get a ticket or possibly end up in jail. So have to keep that in mind. But yeah, that's what I do. That's my goal, is to build something that I think would be really neat and cool, and something that looks like it came from that time period where people would say, hey, what type of car is that? Is that a Packard, a Hudson, a Buick, or, oh, that looks like something that Lewis Chevrolet made, and say, no, that's my own design. That's my own type car, not no manufacturer. No, I built that myself, and that's my own design and from my own greater image, like they did. They had them guys like Carl Benz and all those. They had a vision and they made it happen, and that's what really fascinates me about those old cars. Is really all the challenges that they had to face, and just thinking about how they went about doing certain things and stuff. That's what really fascinates me and stuff. So if you like this sort of content, hit that subscribe button down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you really liked it. Comment below your thoughts, whatever you may have. If you thought this was a good video, bad video, whatever. And don't forget to share this video with everyone you know. If you really liked it, I would suggest sharing it with everyone you know, because that's going to help me, Boomhauer69, making my dreams and growing this channel a success and stuff. And hope you all have a good day, and thank you for watching. Boomhauer69.